You're turning our daughter into a gold digger, and it's disgusting." For a second, I didn't move. My fingers stayed wrapped around the warm mug like it was glued to my skin, and the kitchen light above the sink buzzed with that thin, irritating hum that always sounds louder when someone is angry. The words landed in my chest with a weight I wasn't prepared for, not because they were brand new, but because of the way he said them. Flat, certain, like he'd already tried me in his mind and found me guilty. We'd been married 18 years. We had a 16-year-old daughter, and until recently I would have sworn we were a united front on the big things: independence, self-respect, not leaning on anyone like a crutch. I used to be the woman who taught our daughter how to change a tire with her own hands and how to look a cashier in the eye when she paid for something with money she earned. I used to be the woman who insisted she learn to say no without apologizing. That's what made the moment so nauseating. Not his accusation. The fact that I could already guess what he was about to bring up. He didn't sit down. He stood there with his shoulders tight and his jaw locked, one hand still gripping his phone like it was evidence. He had that look he gets when he thinks he's being calm, but he's actually trying not to erupt. "Don't call me that," I said. "Then don't act like it," he snapped back. A silence opened between us, thick and awkward and too hot for December. The dishwasher clicked as it cooled down, and somewhere in the house the heat kicked on with a soft rush. My daughter's laughter drifted faintly from upstairs, muffled through the vents, like the house itself was trying to pretend nothing was happening in this kitchen. He set his phone on the counter, face up, and slid it toward me. "I heard her," he said. "I heard what she said." I didn't touch the phone. I kept my palm around my mug, thumb rubbing the chipped rim. I already knew the line. I'd heard it earlier, too. Our daughter in the hallway, leaning her shoulder into the wall with that careless, confident posture teenagers practice like a skill. "I'll just ask him to pay for it," she'd said, like she was asking someone to pass the salt. And then the little laugh that followed, that bright, flippant sound that would have been harmless if it wasn't wrapped around entitlement. My husband didn't wait for me to speak. "She told him," he said, voice lowering, "that if he really liked her, he'd buy her a gift card, and then she said—" His throat worked like he had to force it out. "She said you told her that." The mug in my hands felt suddenly heavier, like someone had poured lead into it. I stared at the wood grain on the counter, at a dark knot shaped like an eye. I could have lied. I could have softened it. But the truth didn't need help. "I said boys like to treat their girlfriends in their first relationship," I said carefully. "I said it can be sweet when they want to." He let out a sharp breath through his nose, almost a laugh, but it wasn't humor. It was disbelief. "Sweet," he repeated. "So now we're raising her to be—" What? A prize? A bill? His tone had an edge that made my shoulders pull up without permission. My grip tightened around the mug. The heat pressed into my skin, and still I didn't let go. "It's not what I meant," I said, "but it's what she's doing." He pointed upward toward the ceiling as if he could see through it, as if he could point directly at her bedroom, and the boy's nervous smile and the way he always hovered half a step behind her, like he wasn't sure he'd earned the right to be there. "He's a good kid," my husband said. "He's shy, he's polite. He acts like she's out of his league." His voice turned sharper. "And you're teaching her to use that." The word use made something in me flare, hot and instant. "I'm not teaching her to use anyone," I snapped. "Then what are you teaching her?" His question didn't sound curious. It sounded like a challenge. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, because the answer wasn't clean. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't something I wanted to lay on the counter next to the phone like another piece of evidence. For the last few months, something in me had shifted in a way I didn't fully understand. Watching my daughter date, watching her test her power without realizing it was power, had pulled up an old feeling I thought I'd outgrown. A memory of being 16 and desperate to be chosen. A memory of thinking love had to be proved, and proved again or it didn't count. I didn't say any of that. I just stood there, the mug trembling slightly in my hands, and listened to my husband's breathing grow heavier. He leaned forward a little, lowering his voice like that made it more controlled. "This isn't feminism," he said. "This is entitlement, and it's coming from you." The accusation hit harder because it was framed like disappointment, like I'd betrayed our shared values, like I'd corrupted something we built together. I swallowed. My throat felt tight. "Why are you making me the villain?" I asked. He stared at me for a beat too long, and that stare was its own kind of cruelty, quiet, unwavering, like he was waiting for me to crumble and admit he was right. "I'm not making you anything," he said. "I'm naming what I'm watching happen." The kitchen light above us seemed harsher all of a sudden, exposing every detail: the faint crack in the tile near the trash can, the water spots on the faucet, the tired lines around his eyes. Harsh overhead light, judgment light, the kind that makes you feel like you're standing in front of an audience even when you're alone. My hand shook, just once, enough to slosh coffee up the inside rim of the mug. "Do you know what it feels like?" I said, voice lower now, "to watch your daughter grow into a world that still expects women to be grateful for crumbs." His face tightened, and for a moment I saw it. The flicker of impatience, the way he wanted to cut me off before I could turn this into something bigger. "This isn't about the world," he said. "This is about you telling her to manipulate a boy who already feels lucky. She even looks at him." I flinched at the word manipulate. Not because I didn't recognize the shape of it, but because I didn't want to admit I'd been careless with my influence. Upstairs, a door closed. Soft, casual. A normal sound that made the tension in my kitchen feel even more unreal, like we were the only two people living inside a different version of our house. My husband reached for his phone again, thumb hovering over the screen. "I'm going to talk to her tomorrow," he said. My stomach dropped. He said it like a decision had already been made, like my voice had been weighed and found too unreliable to matter. And in that second, with the overhead light buzzing and his thumb poised, I realized he wasn't just angry at my advice. He was about to draw a line in our family without me standing on the same side of it. The next morning didn't explode the way I expected. It crept in quietly, which somehow felt worse. I woke before my alarm, the gray light barely pushing through the blinds. My husband's side of the bed was already empty, the sheets smoothed over with that deliberate neatness he uses when he's angry but trying to look composed. I lay there listening to the house wake up, pipes ticking, the hum of the refrigerator, footsteps downstairs, every sound a reminder that nothing had actually been resolved. By the time I came into the kitchen, he was already dressed for work, jacket on, keys in hand. He didn't look at me at first. He poured coffee into his travel mug with steady precision, like his hands didn't belong to the same body as his mood. "Morning," I said. "Morning," he replied, flat. Our daughter came in a minute later, hair pulled into a loose ponytail, hoodie swallowing her shoulders. She kissed my cheek absent-mindedly and reached for the cereal without hesitation. She didn't notice the tension, or maybe she did and chose not to. My husband glanced at her, then at me. Not angry, measured. The kind of look that said he was storing things away. She chatted about school, about a quiz she forgot to study for, about her boyfriend waiting for her by the bike rack later. She said his name lightly, like it was a small, pleasant accessory to her day. "He's bringing me Starbucks," she added, digging into the cereal box. "I told him I was tired." My husband's jaw tightened just enough that I saw it. He took a long sip of coffee. "That's nice," he said. The word nice landed wrong, too clipped, too polite. She didn't notice. She rarely does when adults start rearranging the emotional furniture around her. When she left for school, the door closing behind her with a hollow thud, the silence felt louder than any argument we'd had the night before. "I'm not doing this again," my husband said, shrugging on his jacket. "Doing what?" I asked. "This," he gestured vaguely between us. "This conversation. I said what I needed to say. And I didn't, I shot back. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, back still to me. You defended yourself, he said. You didn't defend her. The door closed behind him before I could respond. That sentence followed me all morning. It sat heavy in my chest while I folded laundry, while I answered emails, while I wiped the counter that was already clean. Defended yourself, not her. By the afternoon, the house felt different, smaller, like the walls were listening. When our daughter came home, she dropped her backpack by the door and kicked off her shoes, humming to herself. She went straight to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and frowned. "We're out of juice," she said. "I'll add it to the list," I replied. She lingered, leaning against the counter, scrolling through her phone. Her smile kept flickering on and off. "He said he might take me to the movies this weekend," she said, "if his parents let him." "That's nice," I said, and immediately hated how much it sounded like her father earlier. She looked up then, eyes narrowing just slightly. "Dad's mad at you," she said. It wasn't a question. I kept my hands busy rinsing a glass I didn't need to rinse. The water ran too cold. "We had a disagreement," I said. "About me?" she pressed. I shut off the faucet. The silence that followed stretched too long. She filled it herself. "He just doesn't get it. He's being weird." Weird, such a small word for something that had already started to fracture. "What did he say?" I asked carefully. She shrugged. "Nothing. Just asked why I always expect him to pay, like it's a crime or something." Her tone sharpened, defensive, a mirror I didn't enjoy seeing. "And what did you say?" I asked. "That it's normal," she replied quickly, "that you said it's cute, that boys want to do that." My stomach dropped, not because the words were wrong, but because of how confidently she used them, like they were a shield. She smiled then, a little sideways, the way teenagers do when they think they've won. "He didn't say anything after that," she added, "just looked annoyed." That look, I knew it. The silent withdrawal, the way he uses quiet like a wall. "Did you ask him how he feels about it?" I asked. She rolled her eyes. "Why would I? If he didn't like it, he wouldn't do it." The logic was so simple, it was frightening. I opened my mouth to correct her, then closed it again. Anything I said now would feel like betrayal, to her or to him. She grabbed a snack and headed upstairs, already tapping out a message on her phone. I caught a glimpse of the screen before she disappeared, a string of laughing emojis followed by, "You're the best." That night at dinner, my husband barely spoke. He asked our daughter about school. He listened. He nodded. He didn't joke. He didn't tease. He didn't look at me unless he had to. The overhead light above the table felt too bright, too exposing. Every clink of silverware sounded amplified. Our daughter talked more than usual, filling the space with stories that felt rehearsed, like she sensed the quiet and wanted to smother it. At one point, she mentioned wanting a new hoodie she'd seen online. "I'll ask him," she said casually. "He owes me anyway." The fork froze halfway to my husband's mouth. "Owes you?" he repeated. She laughed. "It's a joke." He set the fork down slowly. Jokes usually have punchlines. Her smile faltered. Just a crack. "I didn't mean it like that," she said. The silence that followed was sharp enough to sting. I felt it in my throat, the urge to jump in, to smooth it over, to protect her from discomfort the way mothers instinctively do, even when the discomfort might be deserved. "She's 16, I said quietly. "She's figuring things out." He didn't look at me. He looked at her. "So is he said. The sentence hung there, heavy with implication. She pushed her chair back abruptly. "I'm done," she muttered, grabbing her plate and heading upstairs. Her door slammed a moment later. My husband exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "This is exactly what I'm talking about." "And embarrassing her at the table fixes it?" I snapped. He finally looked at me then, eyes tired, not angry anymore. Something worse. "I'm trying to stop this before it turns into something ugly," he said, "and you keep stepping in front of me." "I'm her mother," I said. "That's my job." and I'm her father," he replied. "Or am I just the bad guy now?" I didn't answer, because the truth was messier than either of us wanted to admit. Later that night, long after the house had gone quiet, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from a number I didn't recognize at first. It was him, our daughter's boyfriend. "Hi, Mrs. Sorry to bother you," the message read. "I just wanted to ask something. Did I do something wrong?" My chest tightened as I stared at the screen, realizing that whatever we thought we were teaching our daughter had already reached him too. I learned early that money carries voices, not the loud kind, the quiet ones. The ones that speak at night when the house is asleep and you're counting bills at the kitchen table with a pen that's running out of ink. The ones that tell you what you can and can't afford to want. I was raised by a mother who never talked about money unless she had to, which meant she talked about it all the time. She kept cash folded inside an envelope tucked behind the flour tin, crisp when she could manage it, soft and tired when she couldn't. I remember the sound of that envelope opening, paper whispering against paper, and the way she'd smooth each bill with her thumb like it was something alive that needed calming. She worked mornings at a dry cleaner and nights at a diner, and still found time to sit at the edge of my bed and ask about school. She smelled like starch and coffee. When I was 16, she pressed a $10 bill into my hand and said, "This is for emergencies." I asked what counted as an emergency. She smiled without humor and said, "You'll know." I knew. By the time I met my husband, I was already practiced at not asking for things. I paid my way through community college by shelving books at the library, my fingers always dusty, my wrists aching by the end of each shift. There was a clock above the return desk that ticked too loud, each second a reminder that time was a currency too. I learned to stretch meals, to turn leftovers into something new, to buy shoes that could survive 3 winters. When he asked me out, I offered to split the bill before the menus even arrived. He laughed gently, like it was a reflex, and said, "Let me get this one." I watched him carefully after that, not for generosity, but for expectation. There was none. He didn't keep score. He didn't remind me later. When I paid next time, he didn't protest. That mattered more than flowers ever could. We built our life slowly, carefully. A rented apartment with a radiator that hissed all night. A couch we found on the curb and cleaned until the fabric stopped smelling like someone else's life. I kept a small notebook then, a ledger really, where I wrote down expenses in tight handwriting. Rent, groceries, gas, a line for miscellaneous that always made me nervous. When I got pregnant, that ledger became a comfort and a threat. I added columns. I sharpened pencils. I learned what diapers cost before I learned what our daughter's face would look like. Motherhood didn't soften my relationship with money, it sharpened it. I clipped coupons. I packed lunches. I taught my daughter how to count change before she could read fluently. I told her stories about my mother and the envelope behind the flour tin, about the dignity of paying your own way when you can, and accepting help only when you must. Somewhere along the line, though, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no announcement, just small moments that piled up quietly. I remember the first time my husband insisted I let him handle something I'd always handled myself, a car repair, I think. I remember the relief that followed, unexpected and almost embarrassing. I told myself it was partnership, and it was. But it was also the first time I felt the temptation to rest. When our daughter was born, the world started talking to me differently. Clerks asked if I needed help. Strangers offered advice. People smiled at my vulnerability like it was endearing. There was a warmth to it, but also an undercurrent that unsettled me. The assumption that needing was natural now, that I should lean. I pushed back at first. I prided myself on being the mother who didn't hover, who didn't coddle. I taught my daughter to order her own food, to speak up when something was wrong. I told her she was capable until she rolled her eyes and told me I sounded like a motivational poster. But as she grew older, as her body changed and the world's attention followed, I felt something old and protective stir inside me. a memory of being young and watched, of being valued for the way I looked instead of the way I stood. I wanted her to be cherished, spoiled even. I wanted her to feel desired in a way that didn't feel dangerous. I didn't realize how easily those wants could blur into lessons I never meant to teach. There was a moment, small, almost forgettable, when she was 13 and we were at a school fundraiser. She wanted a bracelet from one of the tables, plastic beads strung too tight, overpriced and flimsy. I told her no. She pouted. A boy behind her in line offered to buy it for her, cheeks red, eyes darting between us. I laughed it off, thanked him, declined. But later, in the car, she asked why I'd said no. He wanted to, she said. It would have been nice. I told her we don't let people buy us things just because they want to. She stared out the window and didn't answer. That silence stayed with me longer than it should have. By the time she was 16, dating for the first time, I was tired in a way that didn't have a name. Tired of being vigilant. Tired of pushing against a world that never fully changed. I watched her with that boy, so polite, so careful, and I saw an opportunity for something gentle, something uncomplicated. When I told her it was sweet when boys paid, I meant it as a kindness, a way to let her receive without fear. I didn't hear the echo of my own mother's envelope opening. I didn't notice how the ledger in my mind had shifted columns. I didn't see how easily a lesson about care could turn into a rule about worth. There were other signs I ignored. The way she'd mention gifts casually, the way she'd frame his spending as proof. Each time a flicker of discomfort passed through me, and each time I brushed it aside. Teenagers exaggerate. First relationships are awkward. This would balance out. I told myself I was teaching her confidence. I didn't ask myself whose confidence it was built on. Looking back, I can see the pattern more clearly. The small indulgences I allowed myself as a mother who had always denied herself. The relief of not always being the strong one. The subtle pleasure in watching my daughter receive what I'd once had to earn the hard way. It wasn't greed, it was fatigue. I kept my old ledger in a drawer long after we didn't need it anymore. The pages yellowed, the ink faded. Sometimes I'd open it just to feel the weight of it in my hands. Proof of survival, proof that I'd made it through. I didn't realize I was passing down something else along with those stories. A quiet permission to let someone else carry the cost. A suggestion that being taken care of was the same as being valued. The night my husband accused me in the kitchen, that old ledger was still in the drawer. The envelope from my mother still sat in a box of keepsakes, empty now, but intact. The voices of money, patient as ever, waited for me to listen. And upstairs, my daughter laughed into her phone, unaware that the lessons I'd meant to protect her were already bending into something I no longer recognized. The shift wasn't loud. That was the most unsettling part. Nothing slammed. No one shouted. The house didn't crack open with drama. Instead, things began to erode quietly, like water finding the same weak spot over and over. It started with tone. My husband stopped asking me what I thought. He told me what he was going to do. He didn't announce it as punishment. He framed it as necessity. "I'll handle the conversations with her from now on," he said one evening, eyes fixed on the TV. "You're too close to this. Too close." As if closeness were a flaw. I stood behind the couch, one hand resting on the back cushion. The fabric felt worn there, flattened by years of leaning. I waited for him to look up. He didn't. "I'm her mother," I said. He muted the TV. The sudden quiet felt like pressure in my ears. "And I'm trying to keep her from becoming someone she'll regret," he replied. Calm, controlled, worse than anger. The silence after that stretched. He didn't fill it. I did, eventually, with a sentence I didn't even believe anymore. "I was only trying to help." He nodded once, sharp and dismissive, like the matter was settled. From then on, decisions moved around me instead of through me. He spoke to her privately. He set rules without discussion. When I disagreed, he sighed. When I persisted, he looked at me like I was exhausting. At dinner, he corrected her gently but publicly. You don't ask people to buy you things, he said one night, cutting his chicken carefully. That's not how respect works. She flushed. Her eyes darted to me, searching. I opened my mouth. He raised his hand, not toward me, just enough to signal pause. Let me finish, he said. The room went very still. Even the air felt tight. I closed my mouth. Afterward, in the kitchen, I confronted him in a whisper. You didn't have to do that in front of her. He rinsed his plate, movements precise. She needs to hear it, he said, and she needs to hear it from someone who isn't defending bad behavior. Bad behavior. The phrase lodged itself somewhere behind my ribs. There were smaller things too, subtler. He started keeping track of money out loud. That hoodie cost how much? Did you see the receipt for that? Funny how gifts keep adding up. Each comment landed like a pebble dropped into water, individually harmless, together, rippling. Once, while sorting mail, he held up a credit card statement and glanced at me. This is what happens when people think someone else will always cover it, he said. I wasn't even sure who he was talking about anymore. At school pickup one afternoon, another mother made an offhand joke while we waited by the gate. Must be nice, she said, nodding toward my daughter, having a boyfriend who spoils her already. I smiled automatically. The gate screeched open. Behind me, I felt my husband stiffen. On the drive home, he didn't turn the radio on. People notice, he said finally. I stared out the window. The trees blurred past, bare branches scratching the sky. Notice what? I asked. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter. The kind of girl we're raising. The words hollowed something out in me, a sense of being watched, judged, reduced to a single narrative. At home, our daughter went straight upstairs. I lingered in the car a moment longer, hands resting uselessly in my lap. The cold seeped in through the door seams. Inside, the house felt colder too, though the thermostat hadn't changed. Cold light from the hallway spilled across the floor, harsh and unforgiving. That night, I heard him talking to her through her bedroom door. Not arguing, explaining. His voice low, steady, reasonable. I stood at the end of the hall, unseen, listening. Not about what you deserve, he was saying. It's about what you expect. She murmured something I couldn't hear. And I don't want you learning the wrong lesson, he added. I waited for her to say my name. She didn't. The silence that followed was worse than if she had. Over the next weeks, my role shrank in small, humiliating ways. When she asked permission for things, she asked him. When she wanted advice, she went to him. If she came to me first, he would follow up later, reframe it, correct it. Well, what your mother meant was, she didn't realize, I think it's better if... Each sentence carved a little more space between my words and their impact. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone with her boyfriend in the living room. I can't ask anymore, she said, laughing nervously. Dad freaks out. Dad, not we. She lowered her voice. Yeah, I know. It's stupid. Just don't bring it up around him. I stood in the doorway, unseen again. My chest tightened. When she noticed me, she jumped. Oh, hi, she said, flushing. I smiled, too quickly. It's fine, I said. I was just passing through. She hung up soon after and retreated upstairs without another word. That evening, I tried to talk to my husband. Really talk. I feel like you've pushed me out, I said, keeping my voice even. Like I don't get a say anymore. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. I didn't push you out, he said. You stepped back. The sentence stunned me into silence. I stepped back? I repeated. You made choices, he said. I'm just dealing with the consequences. There it was, the rewriting, the quiet shifting of responsibility. I felt something tremble in my hands. I tucked them under the table. So now I'm the problem, I said. He sighed. Again. That sound had become a kind of punctuation. I'm saying, he replied carefully, that your advice put us here. The room seemed to tilt. Not dramatically, just enough to make me uneasy. I stopped bringing things up after that, not because I agreed, but because every attempt ended the same way, with him calm and resolute and me feeling small and unreasonable. Silence became a weapon I learned to fear. Silence at breakfast, silence in the car, silence when I entered a room mid-conversation. Once, during a family dinner with relatives, my sister-in-law made a joke about training boys early. Everyone laughed. My husband didn't. He glanced at me. Just a glance. Quick. Loaded. I felt heat rise to my face. I laughed too loudly to cover it. Later, he said nothing about it, which somehow felt worse. I began to doubt myself in quiet moments, standing in the shower, folding clothes, lying awake at night. Had I really been wrong? Had my fatigue turned into carelessness? Was I defending something ugly without realizing it? One night, I opened the drawer and took out my old ledger. The pages were brittle now, the numbers faint. I ran my finger down the columns, remembering the woman who wrote them. So careful, so deliberate. My chest ached. Downstairs, laughter drifted up, the sound of my husband and daughter watching something together, their voices easy, unburdened. I sat on the edge of the bed with the ledger in my lap, feeling like a guest in my own house. The next morning, my husband left early. No goodbye. Our daughter came into the kitchen, eyes tired. "Dad says I'm not allowed to ask him for stuff anymore," she said flatly. I stiffened. "Ask who?" "Him," she replied. "My boyfriend." There was no anger in her voice, just resignation. "He says it's better this way," she added. "And what do you think?" I asked. She shrugged. "I don't know. It's whatever." Whatever. The word landed like a small collapse. She grabbed her bag and left, the door clicking shut behind her. No hug, no glance back. I stood there alone, the kitchen too quiet, the light too bright, realizing that somewhere in the effort to correct her, we'd taught her something else entirely, that the safest way through conflict was to stop wanting. And in that moment, holding my old ledger in my hands, I understood that this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about who got to define right and wrong in my family, and how easily I'd been written out of the story. The moment didn't arrive with thunder. It came disguised as routine. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that barely leaves an imprint. I was folding towels on the couch, the television murmuring in the background, when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I almost ignored it. Almost. The name on the screen made my breath hitch. It was him. I stared at the phone long enough for it to stop buzzing, then picked it up before the screen could go dark. My hands felt strangely steady, like my body had already decided something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. "Hi, Mrs." the message read. "I'm sorry to bother you again. I just wanted to ask, is it bad if I can't always pay?" The question was simple. That was what made it devastating. I read it twice, then a third time. Another message followed, almost immediately, like he'd been holding his breath. "I don't want her to think I don't care. I don't have a job right now, and my parents check my account." The room felt too quiet. The TV droned on about something trivial, a laugh track floating through the air like it belonged to another life. I sat back, the towel slipping from my hands onto the floor. This wasn't a fight between adults anymore. This was a 16-year-old boy asking a grown woman if his worth had a dollar amount. I typed, erased, typed again. "No," I finally wrote. "It's not bad. Caring isn't measured that way." There was a pause before his reply, long enough for my chest to tighten. "I was worried," he said. "I didn't want to disappoint her, or you. Or you." The ledger flashed through my mind, the columns, the careful numbers, the voice of my mother saying, "You'll know, I did know." I set the phone down and stared at the wall, at the faint scuff mark near the baseboard that we'd never bothered to paint over. The house felt suddenly unfamiliar, like I'd been living inside a version of it shaped by other people's decisions. When my daughter came home that evening, she looked drained, not angry, just tired. She dropped her bag by the door and went straight to the fridge, standing there with it open like she couldn't remember what she'd been looking for. "Can we talk?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. We sat at the kitchen table under the same harsh overhead light that had witnessed too many quiet reckonings. I waited for my husband to come in from the garage. He didn't. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space between us. "I heard from him today," I said. Her eyes flicked up, sharp. "What did he say?" I chose my words carefully, not defensively, not apologetically. "He asked if it was wrong that he can't always pay," I said. He sounded scared. Her shoulders tensed. She picked at the edge of the table. "He didn't tell you that," she muttered. "He didn't have to," I replied. Silence settled in, heavy but not hostile. I didn't rush to fill it. "I didn't mean to make him feel bad," she said finally. "I was just joking." I nodded. "I know." The admission surprised her. She looked at me, really looked at me, like she was checking for a trap. "But jokes still teach people things," I continued, "especially when they're repeated." She swallowed. "Dad says I shouldn't expect stuff." "And what do you think?" I asked gently. She shrugged, but it was weaker this time. "I don't know, it's confusing. You say one thing, he says another." There it was, the split, the fault line we'd carved straight through her. I took a breath, just one. "I need to tell you something," I said, "and I need you to hear it without thinking about who's right." She nodded slowly. "When I was your age," I began, "I learned to survive by not asking for help. I learned to measure my value by how little I needed from anyone. That's not a lesson I want you to inherit." She frowned. "Then why?" "I also don't want you to learn that someone proves love by spending money," I said, "because that's not fair to you, or to him." Her eyes dropped to the table. The overhead light cast a sharp shadow along her jaw. "I didn't think about it like that," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm thinking about it now." She didn't respond right away. She just sat there, fingers laced together, knuckles pale. "I think I messed up," she said eventually. The words were small, honest, fragile. Something inside me clicked. Not relief, not triumph, but clarity. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about stopping the damage before it hardened into something permanent. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. My husband appeared in the doorway, pausing when he saw us at the table. "What's going on?" he asked. "We're talking," I said. He hesitated, then pulled out a chair and sat down, arms crossing automatically. The posture of defense. I met his eyes, didn't flinch. "I got a message from him today," I said. His jaw tightened. "You shouldn't be in the middle of that." "I'm not," I replied. "I'm listening." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched. "He's scared," I continued. "He thinks he's failing because he can't pay for everything." My husband exhaled sharply. "That's not what I know," I said, cutting in softly but firmly. "Intentions don't always translate." Our daughter looked between us, eyes wide. "This is why I said it wasn't healthy," my husband said, frustration bleeding through. "And this is why I'm saying we need to be careful," I replied. "Both of us." He stared at me, something unreadable passing across his face. "I need you to hear me," I said. "Not as someone who is wrong, as someone who sees what this is doing." He didn't respond right away. His gaze dropped to the table, to his hands. The ledger flashed in my mind again, the weight of it, the proof of survival. "I'm not stepping back anymore," I said. "Not from her. Not from this." The words surprised even me. They landed with a quiet finality. My husband looked up slowly. "Are you saying I handled this wrong?" he asked. "I'm saying we both did," I replied. The air felt charged, like something had shifted just enough to be dangerous. Our daughter pushed her chair back. "I'm going to my room," she said softly. She paused at the doorway, then turned back. I don't want him to feel bad, she added. I really don't. The door closed behind her with a soft click. My husband and I sat there, the kitchen humming around us, the space between us suddenly exposed. I'm not letting this turn into something ugly, I said quietly. He leaned back, studying me, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in weeks. Then what are you going to do? He asked. I looked down at the table, at the faint scratches left by years of meals and homework and arguments, and realized I already knew the answer, even if saying it would change everything. I didn't answer him right away, not because I didn't know, but because I understood the cost of saying it out loud. That night, after everyone went to bed, I stayed up alone at the kitchen table. The house had settled into its nighttime sounds, the soft click of the heater, the refrigerator cycling on and off, the distant creak of floorboards as they cooled. I turned off the overhead light and left the small lamp on instead. Its glow was low, contained, private. I opened the drawer and took out the ledger. The cover was worn thin at the corners, the spine bent from being opened too many times in too many places. I hadn't written in it for years, but the habit of reaching for it came back immediately. I laid it flat and open to a blank page near the back. I didn't start with numbers. I started with dates. The night my husband confronted me in the kitchen, the morning he said he'd handle the conversations, the first time our daughter stopped coming to me first, I wrote slowly, deliberately, not accusations, observations. I added the message from the boy, copying his words exactly as they appeared on my phone. I didn't paraphrase. I didn't soften them. I wanted the truth to stay intact. I don't want her to think I don't care. I don't have a job right now. My parents check my account. Seeing it on paper changed something. It stripped away interpretation and left only impact. Over the next few days, I paid attention in a way I hadn't before, not emotionally, methodically. I noticed how often my husband framed decisions as already made, how frequently he spoke for me when others were around, how my daughter deferred without even realizing she was doing it. At breakfast one morning, my husband mentioned cutting back on her allowance until she understands value. He didn't ask my opinion. He didn't look at me. I wrote it down later. The exact phrasing, the tone. Another evening, my daughter asked him if she could go to the mall. He said yes, then added, "And remember what we talked about?" She nodded, eyes on the floor. I wrote that down too. I wasn't collecting ammunition. I was mapping a pattern. Midweek, the boy messaged me again, short this time. "Thank you for what you said before." That was all. I didn't reply right away. When I did, I kept it simple. You don't need to prove yourself with money. Please don't feel pressured. His response came quickly. I won't tell her you said that. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. I'm not asking you to, I typed back. That night, I spoke to my daughter again, briefly, carefully. How are things going? I asked, folding laundry beside her. She shrugged. Okay. Anything you want to tell me? I pressed. She hesitated, then shook her head. I don't want to mess things up, she said. With who? I asked. She didn't answer. I didn't push. I made a note instead, not of what she said, but of what she didn't. A few days later, I ran into the boy's mother at the grocery store. It wasn't planned. It never is with these things. She recognized me first, smiled politely, too politely. Hi, she said. You're Mom, right? Yes, I replied. We stood there with carts between us, frozen vegetables sweating onto the linoleum. She hesitated, then leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. I hope this isn't awkward, she said. But I just wanted to say, my son really likes your daughter. I know, I said. She nodded. He worries a lot. About not being enough. My chest tightened. He's a good kid, I said. She smiled, relieved. That's what we keep telling him. There was a pause, a breath. He mentioned feeling a bit behind, she added, financially. I told him he's 16 and that's normal. I held her gaze, didn't flinch. It is normal, I said. Her shoulders relaxed. I'm glad you think so. We parted after that. No confrontation, no drama, just confirmation. That evening, I pulled the ledger out again. I added the grocery store conversation, not names, just facts. I wasn't preparing to accuse my husband. I was preparing to anchor myself. When he spoke to me later that night, his tone was lighter than it had been in weeks. I think things are settling, he said. She seems less demanding. I looked at him, really looked at him. She seems quieter, I replied. He waved a hand. Same thing. I didn't argue. I wrote that down later, too. I started making copies, not of messages, of patterns. I saved screenshots of the boys' texts, not to use against anyone, but so I wouldn't doubt myself later. I printed them and slipped them into the back of the ledger. I found myself paying closer attention to how money moved in our house, who controlled it, who commented on it, who felt entitled to decide how it should shape behavior. One afternoon, while sorting mail, my husband joked about nipping this spoiled phase in the bud. He laughed. I didn't. I wrote the phrase down that night, word for word. The ledger grew heavier, not physically, emotionally. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns too fast. This was colder, clearer. One evening, I asked my daughter if she wanted to invite her boyfriend over for dinner. She looked surprised. Dad didn't say, "I'm asking," I said. She nodded slowly. Okay. When I told my husband, he hesitated. Why? He asked. To talk, I replied. To who? He pressed. All of us, I said. He frowned. I don't think that's necessary. I met his eyes. I do. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Fine, he said, but I don't want this turning into a lecture. Neither did I. The night of the dinner, I cooked something simple, nothing indulgent, no performance, just food. The boy arrived early. He stood in the doorway with his hands folded awkwardly in front of him, eyes darting between us. Hi, Mrs. He said. Thank you for inviting me. You're welcome, I replied. Come in. He glanced at my husband, waiting for approval. My husband nodded once. At the table, conversation stayed light. School, movies, a class project. Then my husband asked, casually, So, you saving up for anything? The boy stiffened. Just a little. He said. Not really. I watched my daughter's face, the flicker of discomfort. My husband smiled. Good, no pressure at your age. The words were kind. The timing was not. I noted the shift, the contradiction. The way concern was suddenly reframed as generosity. After dinner, while the kids were in the living room, my husband leaned toward me. See? He said quietly. It's fine. I nodded. But inside, something locked into place. That night, after everyone went to bed, I added one more line to the ledger. He decides when the lesson begins and ends. I didn't know exactly how this would play out yet. I didn't need to. What I knew was this. I wasn't imagining the imbalance anymore. I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was watching it unfold step by step, and I was done being the only one who remembered how it started, because the next conversation wouldn't be private or quiet or easy to dismiss, and once it happened, there would be no way to pretend this was just a phase. The room didn't know what was coming. That's what struck me first, the ordinariness of it. The table set the same way it always was. The same overhead light casting its unforgiving circle. The same chairs pushed in at familiar angles, legs scuffing the floor in grooves worn by years of repetition. I'd chosen the night carefully, not rushed, not tense on the surface. A family dinner that looked, from the outside, like any other. My husband sat at the head of the table, posture relaxed, one arm draped over the chair back like a man certain of his footing. Our daughter sat to his right, scrolling on her phone until he cleared his throat and she slid it face down onto the table with a practiced motion. The boy sat across from her, back straight, hands folded, polite to the point of pain. I took my seat last. No one noticed the folder in my bag at first. That was intentional. Dinner began with small talk, safe topics, school deadlines, a movie trailer my husband had seen. The boy nodded, answered when spoken to, smiled when appropriate. My daughter laughed a little too loudly, glancing between us as if gauging temperature. Halfway through the meal, my husband leaned back slightly and wiped his mouth with his napkin. "So," he said casually, "how are things going between you two?" My daughter shrugged. "Fine." The boy nodded. "Yeah, good." My husband smiled. "Good, I'm glad." He took a sip of water, then added, like it was an afterthought, "Relationships work best when expectations are clear." My daughter's shoulders stiffened. The boy looked down at his plate. I set my fork down. The sound was soft but deliberate. "I agree," I said. My husband glanced at me, not annoyed, curious. "I think it's important we're all clear," I continued, "especially since expectations have been discussed." The air shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Our daughter frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," my husband said smoothly, "that learning respect early matters." I met his gaze, held it. "It also means learning not to confuse silence with agreement," I said. The boy's head lifted slightly. My daughter looked at me now, really looked at me, confusion giving way to unease. My husband's smile thinned. "I'm not sure what you're getting at." I reached for my bag. The zipper sounded too loud in the quiet room. I pulled out the ledger first, set it on the table between us. Its worn cover looked out of place among clean plates and folded napkins. "What's that?" my husband asked. "My record," I said. He chuckled once. "Of what?" "Of what's been said," I replied, "and what's been ignored." Our daughter's eyes widened. "Mom." I raised a hand, just slightly. Not commanding, grounding. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," I said. "I'm here because something real is happening, and pretending it isn't has consequences." My husband leaned forward, forearms on the table. "This is unnecessary." I opened the ledger. The pages rustled softly, the sound intimate, almost tender. "I wrote down the night you said you'd handle the conversations," I said, not looking at him. "The morning you decided allowances without asking me. The dinners where correction replaced discussion." I looked up then. "I wrote down when our daughter stopped coming to me." My daughter swallowed. "That's not fair," my husband said. "It's accurate," I replied. He exhaled sharply. "So this is about control now?" "No," I said. "This is about pattern." I turned the ledger toward our daughter and the boy. "I also wrote down something else," I continued. "Messages I received." The boy froze. My husband's eyes flicked to him, then back to me. "You've been texting him?" "He reached out," I said, "because he was afraid." The boy's face flushed crimson. "I told you not to involve—" My husband started. "You told me not to interfere," I said calmly. "You didn't tell him not to ask for help." The room went still. I reached into the folder and took out the printed screenshots, laid them flat one by one, smoothing the edges with my fingertips. "I won't read everything," I said, "but I will read this." I cleared my throat once. "Is it bad if I can't always pay?" I read aloud. "I don't want her to think I don't care. I don't have a job right now. My parents check my account." The words hung in the air like smoke. My daughter stared at the page, her face draining of color. "That's not," she began. I held up the next page. "And this." I was worried. I didn't want to disappoint her, or you. Silence slammed down on the table. The boy's hands trembled. He folded them tighter. "I didn't know he felt like that," my daughter whispered. "That's because he didn't feel safe saying it," I replied. My husband pushed his chair back slightly. "This is manipulative," he said. "You're putting words in his mouth." I looked at him, really looked at him. "Then say they're false," I said. "Tell him he imagined it." The boy glanced up at my husband, eyes wide, searching. My husband opened his mouth, closed it. That pause froze the room. I continued before he could recover. I also spoke to his mother, I said, accidentally, at the store. His head snapped toward me. You went behind my back? I existed in the same space, I replied. She told me he worries about being enough, financially. I turned to the boy. That's true, isn't it? He hesitated, then nodded once. Small. Brave. Yes, ma'am. My daughter's breath hitched. I didn't mean to make you feel like that, she said quickly. I know, I said, and that's why this matters now. My husband's voice sharpened. So what? You're blaming me for this? I'm saying, I replied evenly, that correction without care becomes pressure, and pressure doesn't teach, it distorts. He scoffed. I was protecting her. And I was protecting both of them, I said. I slid one final page forward. A handwritten line. He decides when the lesson begins and ends. My husband stared at it. You made this into a power struggle, he said. No, I said. You did when you decided I was too close to matter. That landed. Our daughter looked between us, eyes glassy. Dad, did you really think I was becoming spoiled? He hesitated. I thought you were learning the wrong lesson, he said. And did you think I was teaching it? She asked, voice cracking. He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, heavy, public. I thought your mother was, he said finally. Her face crumpled. I felt it then. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but a clean, cold clarity. That's the part you never said out loud, I said. Until now. The boy pushed his chair back slightly. I'm sorry, he murmured. I didn't want to cause problems. You didn't, I said. You revealed them. My husband stood abruptly. This is getting out of hand. No, I replied, standing too. It's finally in it. The overhead light buzzed faintly, harsh, exposing. I gathered the papers calmly, stacking them back into the folder. I'm not asking for an apology, I said. I'm setting a boundary. He folded his arms. And what's that? That no one in this house gets to redefine worth using money, I said. Not for our daughter, not for her partner, not by silencing one parent to elevate the other. My voice didn't shake. If you want to teach values, I continued, we do it together, or we don't do it at all. Our daughter stood suddenly. I don't want him to feel like he owes me, she said. I really don't. She turned to the boy. I'm sorry. He nodded, eyes wet. My husband looked around the table, realizing too late that the room had shifted away from him. What are you saying? He asked me quietly. I met his gaze, steady. I'm saying this doesn't get buried, I replied, and it doesn't get rewritten later. The ledger rested between us, closed now, solid, because the next step wouldn't be another conversation. It would be a decision, and once it was made, there would be no way to pretend this night hadn't changed the balance forever. The house felt different the next morning, not lighter, not healed, just honest. The overhead light stayed off while I made coffee, letting the soft gray of early morning fill the kitchen instead, the kind of light that doesn't accuse, the kind that waits. My husband came in quietly, hair still damp from the shower. He stopped when he saw me at the table, the ledger resting near my elbow. Not open, just there. We didn't speak at first. The coffee machine hissed and clicked, finishing its cycle. I didn't sleep much, he said finally. Neither did I replied. He poured himself a cup and sat down across from me. His shoulders looked lower than usual, like the weight had finally registered. I didn't realize how far it had gone, he said. Not defensive, not sharp, just tired. I nodded once. That's what happens when things get decided instead of discussed. He rubbed his hands together, staring at the wood grain. I thought I was fixing something. I know, I said, but fixing without listening breaks things too. The silence that followed wasn't weaponized this time. It was reflective, necessary. Our daughter came downstairs a few minutes later, hesitant, like she wasn't sure what version of the house she was walking into. She paused when she saw both of us at the table. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," we answered, almost in unison. She poured cereal, sat down, and picked at it without eating. Then she looked up at her father. "I talked to him last night," she said. "I told him I don't expect him to pay for things, that I just like being with him." My husband's eyes closed briefly. He nodded. "That was good," he said. "That was the right thing." She hesitated. "I also told him I was wrong to joke about money." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "I'm proud of you," he said. Her shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. She turned to me. I didn't realize how it sounded, what I was saying. I thought it was normal. "I know," I said. "That's why we talk about it." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her grip was warm, steady. Later that afternoon, the boy came by. No dinner, no setup, just a brief visit. They sat on the porch steps together, knees almost touching, talking quietly. No laughter this time. Something gentler, more deliberate. When he left, he shook my hand and thanked me. Not elaborately, not nervously, just sincerely. That mattered. Over the next weeks, the tension didn't vanish, but it shifted. Conversations happened out loud instead of behind closed doors. Decisions came back to the table where they belonged. My husband didn't retreat into silence anymore, and when he felt himself doing it, he stopped. "I'm thinking," he'd say, or "I need a minute." That was new. Our daughter began paying for things again without making a show of it. Sometimes they split, sometimes he treated, sometimes she did. It stopped being a test. One evening, I cleaned out a drawer and came across the envelope from my mother, still empty, still intact. I held it for a long moment before putting it back, not as a relic of scarcity, but as a reminder of what survival taught me and what it didn't have to teach her. The ledger stayed where it was, not hidden, not displayed, just available. A record, a boundary. One night, my husband touched it as he passed the table. "I'm glad you didn't let this go," he said quietly. "So am I replied. Not because I was right, but because silence would have been easier and far more damaging. Now, when the house is quiet, it feels earned. And when I sit at the table with my coffee, the ledger nearby, it no longer feels like proof of endurance alone. It feels like proof of clarity. If any part of this stayed with you, let me know. Sometimes laying things on the table, like that old book of numbers, helps us see what really matters and reminds us we're allowed to change what we pass on.